YouTube. So today I want to talk about animal guides and how I've used them in my practice or animals in general. It was funny how I kind of started thinking, like looking into all the different things as I've advanced down my path, and I've kind of realized, first no, I don't ever use animals. They aren't really a thing. Like I have my cats and my pets, my familiars that I love oh so much, but actual like animals that call out to me in a spiritual sense, I really don't feel like that's ever been a thing, except until I looked back and I was like, actually no, it is very much a thing. That is a thing that I use all the time, or at least used to use all the time. And so I want to talk a little bit about how I have used animals and societies or cultural representation of characteristics in those animals to look at myself critically and then advance further as a person, and then how I hope to continue to do that in my craft. Basically what I did is I kind of went through a weird stage of life where there were different animals that would appear to me a bunch. So when I grew up, I lived in this place called the Fox Valley, and I never saw an entire fox there my entire life until the day before I left to move into the city of Chicago. I was driving between these two towns, from one town over to my town, and so as I'm driving, I suddenly realized there's like this giant, looks like, could be a raccoon, could be a dog in the road, and it's just kind of like standing there. And so I slowed down. I'm only going like 25 miles per hour, wasn't that fast at all. So I slowed down to stop to make sure I don't hit it, and I'm come to a complete stop. And as my lights of my car, because at night, hit the animal, I realized that is not a raccoon, that is a fox. And to me it looked very, very big. And the thing just turned around and looked at me. Like, didn't hiss or growl or bare its teeth at all, just like turned and looked at my car like, yeah, whatever, and like stared at me for like a good minute. And I'm like, so if the fox doesn't move, what do I do? And then it finally just like walked off and trailed off into somebody's yard, and I drove on, and I really didn't think anything of it until there were a lot of things that just kept kind of popping up about foxes, with their curiosity, their playfulness, their mischievousness, that I really, really enjoyed. But on the flip side of that as well, I think there are a lot of negative aspects to that, which I put on the fox. That mischievousness can get you into trouble, that it can also come over as manipulative, or any sort of almost naivety a little bit, because you don't know when to stop playing, so you keep playing and keep going back and forth and thinking these little playful jabs or this workaround to get to know people better is good when it's not. And I didn't really recognize that in myself, but suddenly I found myself really identifying with this fox character. And in that naivety, I finally, another part of my life where basically I was starting to lose my friends, lose my relationship was falling apart at the time, my family was having a real hard time, and all around the same time I felt that I had been way too naive about a lot of things, and I was also fighting that. Like, everyone kept telling me, you don't know everything, but I did know everything. I wanted to know things. So I think at that time my journey changed to a different animal, and I felt really connected to snakes for some reason. They just kept kind of appearing in artworks or stuff around that. Never run into an actual snake, but I just kind of like, I got obsessed with drawing them a lot. A lot of what I do is just magic and introspection and all that just happens to art for me because I am an artist. So I'm like drawing all these snakes all the time. I'm getting really into them, and now looking back I can see it's like a snake is it's coiled, it's cold-blooded, it's very analytical, I think, in a lot of ways. And then going back to like the old Adam and Eve story from Christianity, you have like the snake is kind of guarding knowledge. Like, it has this, it's also a temptation. It's go this way, do this way. Like, I know what's best for you. And I really, really clicked with that. I wanted to be I know what's best for me. I know how to protect me. I can be cold-blooded. I can kind of be cruel in some ways and not care. I can cut people out of my life that I no longer feel are necessary, very quickly, without much thought. I did that a lot, and that worked for a while. And I think even during that phase actually is when I met a really great friend of mine who's probably, like, she's my solid rock. I love her to death, and that was really great how we were kind of both in a way going through that phase together of being just very cold and distant all at the same time. And then suddenly I felt like snakes do, they shed their skins. So I felt the need to just erupt into change, but I felt I was changing into something that was not the same. And so I felt very like I wanted to still be this kind of cold person who knew what was going on, what was happening, but I couldn't. Like, there was no, I wanted to change, I needed to change, and I needed drastic changes. And suddenly, out of nowhere, I started realizing how many crows were just everywhere. Like, especially in the city of Chicago, they just kept kind of like popping up on lampposts as I was walking to class, or randomly just showing up where I was not expecting them to. Okay, crows keep popping up. It's very weird indeed. So I started looking into it. I was like, well, maybe it's like a sign, because no matter, even before I was on my path, I was believed heavily in, if you ask the universe for a sign, it will give it to you. And these crows just kept appearing, and I didn't know what to do. I had like a year left in my undergrad degree in Chicago, and I'd kind of lost a lot of my friends. A lot of my other friends had moved, and even though I was kind of cementing this really great new life, I also felt like nothing fit right like it used to, where you'd walk down the street and you'd feel like you were at home, or you'd walk into your apartment, or there are certain places that, you just feel right, I think, at certain times in your lives. And places that used to feel right for me didn't feel right anymore. I felt very antsy, very just not centered in anything that I was doing. So I decided to hop on a plane and go to Japan for a study abroad for 4 months. When I landed in Japan, there are also these crows there, and they're huge. And they even have huge signs in a lot of the parks that say, like, do not feed the crows, or the crows will dive bomb you and take your food if you're on your picnic. So a crow for me suddenly became an animal I was drawing all the time. It was something that was speaking to me. So for me, it was a crow was adventure, it was flight, it was hoarding information or things again, because I know they're collectors. So for me, I was trying to get a little bit of everything as much as I could, take it all in again. I was thirsty again, curious again. And as I got back from Japan, I decided to move out to California for grad school. And again, the crows kept popping up. And I decided at that point to really shed the remainder of what I had gone through under my snake phase, I guess, which was, there were a lot of things people were commenting on that I realized from the snake that were very true to me, which is I was turning cold, I was turning distant, I was turning very opinionated without much fact, unapproachable to a lot of people, intimidating I was, not in a good way, not in a respectful way, but in a, that she just looks like a bitch way. And I didn't want that, and I didn't want to be that person that was ever held as ignorant or too staunch in their beliefs, even especially when I had just gotten back from this life-changing trip that had really shaken me and gone like, oh no, there is still great new things for you to explore. Just because old things feel wrong doesn't mean new things will continue to feel wrong as well. So as I'm going through that, I decided to do a personality experiment for the first year, which is I was going to be very critical of myself in a way I'd never been before, where any suggestion anyone had given me, I would take and I would use. I would not disregard any of them, which was interesting to say the least. For me, there's other people who I guess in their personalities naturally always look to themselves as the problem. I am what's wrong. I did something wrong. That was a problem that I did. And I had very much the opposite issue of that. In my head, everyone else was always the issue ever since I was young. It was always like, no, you did something wrong. Even though I was late, you shouldn't have had it at that time. That was something that, well, I think can be helpful, especially if you're growing up in this day and age with a lack of confidence and everything else. I had very high confidence in myself in some respects, but in other respects, it was this, I did not like that idea that I was coming off as a staunch, unmovable force in a lot of ways of ignorant. So I used this, the collection aspect of the crowd. I was going to collect everything I could, and I was actually going to keep my mouth shut for once. So I was really trying to hold back my opinion, because I have it, and it's big, and it's in my head, and I used to just say it all the time. And while that can be fine, and it's good to speak your opinion, there's definitely times when we need to keep our mouths shut and just learn and listen. It was really great to do that, especially during grad school, since I was working on my graphic novel, which you just need tons of criticism and people telling you different things and which way to go, and it probably evolved like so many times. I redrew the first like 10 pages But it finally landed on something that I was very, very proud of and very excited with. And I built some really great friendships out of listening and out of people being able to tell me, hey, like, no, don't do that. And I'd be like, okay, cool, I won't do that. Problem is with me, though, is I don't ever do things in the middle. I'm this extreme or this extreme. So I'm not listening to anybody, cold, indifferent, whatever, to this very warm, welcoming, bubbly person who in a lot of ways were some things of a pushover. And I was starting to notice that in other parts of my life as well, where close friends of mine and family and friends where things were really bothering me and I wasn't saying it until it would bubble up. I had a lot of moments where I'd get very, very frustrated, specifically with my family, and I would just start bawling, crying, and it's because I hadn't been speaking up. I hadn't been saying things that were bothering me because I didn't want to come off as opinionated or cold or indifferent to other people's feelings. And so I realized I had to kind of counter-correct. Is that the right counter-correct? Is that the right word? Counter-correct with it. So, I had to open my beak, like, let's talk about these things. Crows aren't quiet. And as I realized that, and I was like, yeah, no, and I was kind of taking in the crow as something that was maybe in the line of more of a permanent spirit guide per se. I would have a lot of dreams about crows. I was constantly being on the edge of a cliff and falling off of it over and over and over again, but it wasn't a scary dream. It was a very releasing thing. I was falling and then becoming this swarmer. They're called a murder. That's cheery. A murder of crows, and I would just fly around the skies, dodging in and out of the ocean, fields, mountains, whatever. And I'd have this reoccurring dream over and over again, and it felt good, but again, I had to metamorphosis. There was something missing, something that wasn't quite right. And at this time, I realized there is some things that I disregarded from previous aspects of myself that I really missed. And just because it might have seen as something that was no longer useful to you to embody fully doesn't mean that an aspect of it you shouldn't take with you. So for me, the curiosity of the fox was something that was very, very important. That playfulness I had entirely disregarded in some sense, and there's no reason to. I also really miss having that intimidation of that snake, that bit of that cold-bloodedness. While some people felt it was too much, and while disregarding it entirely didn't work either, I needed a little bit of it. There was one part of me that was like, no, you like that about yourself. In this experiment bit and I realized with it, a lot of it, my self-confidence went down, where when you take in too much of everyone's opinion, you do not know what your opinion is anymore. While I didn't like anymore the flightiness of the crow or the constant travel, that time-to-time landing isn't enough for me. I needed a more solid place. So for me, even though these things don't always all add up together, I kind of, in my head, I was like, I'm gonna be a dragon. Like, that's my new animal I'm gonna try to use in Gold. And that seemed to have all those aspects put into one. It had, I don't know, the old mythology with dragons using riddles and word games and that kind of playfulness seemed to echo of the fox to me. The knowledge and old worldness of dragons echoed the snakes aspects, and still with the wings and being able to move around and adventure still seen from the crow. So it had all the things, but it also had this intimidating factor that was there, but also this warmth inside of it. It could choose whether or not to breathe fire or just be this still slightly intimidating but more welcoming figure. It had the decision whether or not to do that. Doing a lot of things that seemed a lot of self-love, things of that nature that would come from the inside. I related a lot to like the inner fire of a dragon, a lot of inner passions, a lot of ambition, things of that nature. Now as I'm coming into my path, I've kind of realized that all of these things, even the dragon that's supposed to be this accumulation of all those tactics, don't really seem to serve me anymore. There is a self-reflection habit that I use them for, to really look at myself and realize that when I'm picking these animals and or creatures as pieces of ways to look at who I am and what I want to do, I naturally had drawn to both for their positive and their negative aspects. Both were reflected in my personality, and it would always take me a minute to see the negative ones and see if they were things that I actually wanted to change, adapt, or move forward with. So that was kind of my animal journey, using animals in my spiritual practice. I don't, like I said earlier, I don't really have an animal now that I'm speaking to in any way, shape, or form. I do go back to those previous ones a lot. Actually, what I did with all of these, after I kind of came to this forward conclusion with all of these guys, as an artist, I created a little mini comic about the adventure. And I did it all in watercolor. It's a little mystical, a little bit convoluted, I guess. But I did draw it as a 16-page mini comic. I would encourage everyone to do, if you especially have an animal that is guiding you on any sort of personality, spiritual, mystical thing, I would encourage you to try and like draw it out, draw the story of you as that, especially like in your mirror book or in your grimoire. List out the positive and the negative aspects, because let me tell you, by doing that, I have definitely advanced way forward as a person. So that's what I really wanted to do, and I finally finished it. I had an idea because I heard Lammas was a great holiday to finish a project on, so I pushed myself really, really hard to finally finish the PDF of the comic with my animals. So the comic is titled Making Muses. If anyone is interested in reading it, down below I have a link to my mailing list, which I just started up. So all you have to, this is really the only way I can figure out how to give everyone a like free PDF download. So sign up for the mailing list, and as you sign up for it, it will then send you a thank you for signing up, which will have the PDF attached to it if that is something you're interested in. So that's how I use animals in my practice. I will see you guys later. I have new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Alright, farewell guys.